I'm just about to show my screen, so give me 1 second. Can you see my slides?
We can see your slides.
Perfect, perfect. So thanks for joining me today. So today we're going to run over how to write a marketing plan that maximizes ROI. And to dive straight into it.
Okay, Tammy, sorry. I
Okay.
just want to stop you for a second. Okay. Sorry, Christopher was saying that there was a bit of feedback because someone's using their computer speakers, but he thinks that it's okay now. So sorry about that.
No problem, no problem. I heard it a little bit as well, so I wasn't
Okay.
sure that. So perfectly, we're just going to run through the overview. And today what we're going to do is just a really quick introduction. Carly did a great job already, so I'll skip past that. And then dive into why do I need a marketing plan and why do some fail, some common pitfalls, and then dive into how to identify the pain and start laying the foundation. Then we'll dive into situational analysis where we really look into all the different parts of research that we have to personally do before we can work on our annual goals and concepting, which are the fun parts of the marketing plan. A lot of times people think, agencies really only work on the concepting, but there's a lot more that goes behind the scenes before we actually dive into the concepting section. And then, of course, you need to make sure you have your measuring and tracking success portion of the marketing plan to ensure that you're on track and you're monitoring throughout the campaign. And then at the very end, as Carly mentioned, we'll have a quick Q&A. So without further ado, we just put a slide in there just a little bit about myself and the organization, just in case you wanted to learn a little bit more about us. I just put that in there so that you have reference, and feel free to, of course, add me on LinkedIn. So why do I need a marketing plan and why do some fail? A lot of times people go into marketing thinking, okay, I have an idea of what my competitors are doing and I have an idea of generally what's out there, so let's just go ahead with a website, some social media, maybe some PPC buying, and they go in without any strategy. And the problem with that is that that's called a shotgun approach, which means that you're really just going ahead and doing things based on your gut feeling. Whereas if you actually do go ahead with a strategic approach, you actually end up saving money and maximizing all your resources. A lot of times when clients come to us in the beginning, they already have some marketing in place. And what you'll notice is that a lot of those things could have been done a little bit better and a little bit more effectively if they had done a marketing plan first. A really great example that we often use is called the tennis ball concept. The beauty of a marketing plan is how concise your messaging can be and how effective it can be. With the tennis ball example, the idea is that, say your organization has 10 value props that they want to talk about. Value propositions being reasons why you should work with us. So sometimes you'll get, we're the cheapest, we're the fastest, you get the best personal attention with us. You can trust us, we have accolades. There's a wide variety of reasons why an organization might work with you. And for an organization who doesn't have a clear key message that comes out of a marketing plan, oftentimes they'll have like a 5-minute elevator pitch. And when that happens, they don't really understand what's happening with your organization, and then they won't be able to pass on. So with the tennis ball example, the idea is, say you have 10 value props, and which are equated to 10 tennis balls. And I want to explain to Carly all the reasons why they should work with your organization. And so I'll toss these 10 tennis balls to Carly and tell her, these are all the great reasons. She might remember 5 of them and catch only 5 of them. And so when I go, oh, Carly, please tell your friends about our organization, and if you're happy with the service that we provide you, please pass it on. So now she has 5 tennis balls. She's going to pass on to another individual, and we have no idea. They might catch 3, and so on and so forth, and someone might eventually catch 1. So when that individual comes to me and tells me, oh, I heard a lot about your organization, blank, I have no idea and no control over what that message is. And therefore, I can't really drive it home and kind of bring in the relationship. Whereas if I had 1 tennis ball and 1 value proposition and I passed it to Carly, And Carly passed it on and on and on. No matter who comes to my organization, I can reinforce that value prop and really drive home. And it also, with very effective key messages or value props, what happens is organizations will soon be drawn to your value prop because it's not confusing and it's easier to spread around. So the value of a marketing plan is really being concise and straightforward about what it is you're offering your your public audience and your target demographic, being clear about those things, and then you can miraculously save a lot of time and money because the message is being spread for you. So why do marketing plans fail sometimes? Whenever we get an organization that comes and says, oh, we have a great marketing plan, it's already in place, all the little details, the problem is that the marketing plan ends up being a catch-all of everything that they aspire to be. And what it becomes is more of an idealistic push rather than something that's practical or realistic. So what we want to do is when you're writing an effective one that returns ROI, you really need to focus on one thing. And that's really hard for organizations to do. So we oftentimes have to coach and coach and coach to get them to really commit to one priority. But as you'll see in the next couple of slides, the more focused you are, the more likely the answers and the mediums that you're supposed to promote on and how to promote on them will become very, very clear. But again, more simple, the better. And then the second downfall that we tend to see is that there's no smart, actionable plan. They might have a really great idea and a really great concept, but carrying it through and carrying the idea through is about 80 to 90% of actual success out of an effective marketing plan. So what we use is we tend to use SMART goals, and you can Google that. That's everywhere around the internet. And the SMART goals, that's really holding individuals accountable for each part of the marketing plan. So say you may be yourself, or maybe you have one person on your marketing team, or you have a group of 3 or 5 or whatever. As long as you make sure that everyone's accountable for one aspect of the marketing plan, then the likelihood of actually achieving your goals will be much greater. The final one is clear KPIs. Another mistake that we often see is that people are doing too many KPIs. They want impressions, they want lead generation, they want to see brand clout. They're trying to do it all at once. An effective way to do it, and again, we'll talk about this later in the slides, is really talking about concentrating on one specific KPI per year. And when you do that, it becomes very clear to the team what decisions you should make. For example, if you want to do impression-based, meaning you want to hit as many people with your key message and not generate leads for the first year, you will then decide to choose mediums that have larger spreads but maybe less engagement and less direct in traffic to a call to action that maybe you've devised with your team. So those are some of the main failures that we see. Obviously there are other ones, but those are the key ones that we see over and over again. So how to identify the pain and start laying the foundation. Before you ever dive into writing a marketing plan, it's very important to get all the key stakeholders in your organizations together to really talk about what are the common pains, what are the things that we want to address in the marketing plan. Oftentimes we see in an individual kind of representing an entire organization and diving into it and then having to go back and rewrite it, and that's not very effective. So it's really important to understand why there's a need and why there's a pain for a marketing plan. The general principles that we use to move into a marketing plan are pretty straightforward. The idea is that you can't achieve everything with the resources you have. No matter if you have $100,000, $50,000, $10, $1 million, you really need to be concise. So one of the main general principles is prioritizing. Oftentimes, if you have a large group of individuals, there's different priorities with different people. But if you kind of lay out the long-term goal, which we'll dive into a little bit later, and then move back, you'll begin to realize which ones are priorities to help you achieve your long-term goal. So prioritizing is really key to writing an effective marketing plan. And simple is hard enough. Oftentimes people are trying to do too much with too little. And to do one thing well is much more important than doing 10 things mediocrely. So it's really important, again, to focus in on simple is hard enough and focus in on one thing. And then align everything to the vision, mission, goals. The approach that we have in writing a marketing plan is very top-down. So you really want to identify where you want to head and then lay out all the foundations to get you there. Oftentimes we call this stucks or items that are barriers that are preventing you from achieving your long-term goals. So I wanted to lay out a couple of common pains and oftentimes what people want from marketing plans. So maybe you can get an idea of maybe some common pains that your organization is having. So common pains are not getting enough clients or leads, starting in a new place or wanting to refresh your brand that's maybe been around for a while, needing to gain exposure because your brand doesn't have enough brand awareness or brand clout, wanting the public to stop viewing them negatively. Maybe you've been getting a lot of negative publicity and you need to switch that conversation. Wanting public awareness around their cause, wanting to educate the public on something maybe that they're not as aware of, that with a bit of education can really help your organization and help them engage with your cause a little bit better. The list goes on, but those are some common pains. And what people want, at the end of the day, the pains are there, but usually it's kind of reflected in a desire to achieve something. So maybe it's to become industry leaders. Maybe it's that your marketing strategies are not effective and you really want a marketing strategy that yields results. Maybe it's that your sales are low and you really need to kind of amp it up. So oftentimes these pains and these general principles will help you not jump to conclusions, but address the pain without actually making assumptions, so that when you dive into the research phase, you know the type of information you're trying to gather. So that leads into the vision and missioning. A lot of times people tend to skip this out, or they might actually look beyond it and think of a vision as something that's tangible. But oftentimes an effective vision is something that's completely idealistic and visionary. It's not something that you're supposed to achieve in the next 5 to 10 years. In fact, oftentimes people say the most effective vision is one where you shoot for the moon and you land among the stars. So, for example, Disneyland is happiest place on earth. Is it the happiest place? Like if you actually go there, there may be behind kids, maybe there's some, people who are fighting or whatnot. But the idea is that they're trying to actually achieve something greater than who they actually are, and so that the whole team is working towards one vision. What falls right under that is your mission, which is what do you do? What is it that you contribute to the world? I don't mean listing out your services or going into those things, but as you define a very clear vision and mission, the actual annual goals and the measurements and how to achieve that will become very clear. So the analysis portion is where you gather all the information so that when you decide what you're going to do with your annual goals, who you should target, and defining those key messages and value props come out of. I would never suggest deciding your value prop, deciding your key target based on gut feeling or what you've seen so far. Oftentimes I find organizations are surprised by what comes out of it because they find out that, wow, the numbers actually show something different in my gut. So it's really important to go through this process. So you may have heard of all of these areas before research, but there are different tactics that you can do that will really help you come out with better results. So for competitor analysis, it's really important to get your salesmen, key stakeholders, C-level managers to kind of get into a room to really outline your top 3 competitors. Those are the individuals that know best who are you competing with and who will you be competing with. By establishing your competitor analysis, you really need to look at their strengths, their weaknesses, and then what specifically do you have an edge over them for? Now, sometimes that takes a little bit more research where you go into those organizations and you ask people who have worked for them. Sometimes it takes, a focus group. But the idea is really to be clear of exactly what differentiates you from those competitors. And by summarizing that, you're going to get a seedling of a value proposition. So competitor analysis is important because it's going to tell you what's going to set you apart. And then when you dive into the customer analysis, you're really looking at their behavioral, psychographic, demographic, and geographic differentiators that make them who they are. We use a tactic called bullseye targeting. What bullseye targeting means is that you begin to profile an individual down to, their interest, their name, where they live, and can be a fictional character, or it can be a customer that currently exists that you really love, and if you could multiply that individual, you would multiply it by 10 times, and you'd be happy to work with just that customer base. So with bullseye targeting, you really need to lay it down. Where do they live? What neighborhood do they live in? What background are they from? Where have they lived all their lives? What are their interests? Where do they go? What magazines do they read? What do they do on their free time? What do they care about? Who influences their decisions? Really, really dive deep into that bullseye target. And I would definitely create 3 or 4 bullseye targets, so that as you're unfolding your value proposition, you can really tie your value prop with a customer that really values what you have to offer. And then that way you can really move towards it. And if you find that your ideal customer isn't really aligned with your value prop, then you need to move either your value prop or change the structure of your organization, or you need to become more aware of what your customer needs is, or change who your customer target is. So there needs to be some moving and alignment. And once you've aligned that, you really can define your value proposition and your target, your ideal target that you want to work towards. So that leads into your annual goals. At this point in the game, when you've devised your vision, your mission, your target, and your value proposition, you begin becoming ready to write your annual goals. Here, you really want to make sure that whatever your vision, your mission, and your key message, which is your value proposition, written in the way that it resonates with your your customer, it means that you have all the foundations ready. Once you know that, you know exactly what goals you need to achieve, what objectives, critical success factors, budgets, resources, and then the SMART goals that go with it, and the annual measurements, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The reason why is that now you know, okay, we want to look at my 5 to 10-year goal. So you establish, a lot of times people want to be industry leaders or be well-known, or they want to educate the public fully. So whatever that 5-year goal is, you begin to look at year 1 and decide what is my biggest barrier to achieving year 5 goal. And then when you're in year 1, you start looking at, okay, let's tackle the biggest barrier, then tackle the second biggest barrier, the third, and so on and so forth. Now, when you're looking at year 1 and you're looking at the goals and objectives, you have now one key target demographic. You have the key message in what you want to relay. And so if, say, for example, the biggest barrier right now is brand awareness. No one knows that you exist. So you know that with your target and with your key message, you need to get that to as many people as possible. So now you've kind of filled in the blank with your measurements. You know you need to hit as many heads as possible. So that's your goal. Hit as many heads as possible, let as many people know about my organization as possible. An average measurement is you want to hit a person about 7 times before they fully are aware of your organization. So what are the objectives? How do you actually get to achieve your goal? And so those could be, we're going to, find 3 media outlets that really target our demographic and effectively reach that. Then you go into critical success factors. This is really integral, as oftentimes people focus on the goals and objectives and forget what are the key aspects of this campaign that will make it successful. So for example, if your message doesn't resonate with your target demographic, then that's going to be an issue. So that's one important key critical success factor that maybe isn't outlined in the goals and objectives. Another critical key success factor might be that we need to hit a critical mass of 1 million impressions. So you can write a bunch of different things that your team knows that you need in order to achieve your goal successfully. Then you go into budget and resources. You look at the limitations in that area, and then that way you know how much your media buy is, how much resources you can spend for execution and whatnot. This is a great time to go out, get quotes, get ideas of exactly what you need and the areas that you need it in. And then the SMART goals, again, accountability, which I mentioned earlier. Once you have the ideas of your objectives, I would assign each objective as a SMART goal to a different person that's accountable. Sometimes you have a small team, so someone might take care of all 3 objectives or all 5 objectives. Sometimes they may take care of 1 or 2. So it's really, really important that you have accountabilities so that when you're going into the campaign, you know that someone's always taking care of some aspect of your promotional campaign or the work that you're trying to do. So concepting. What does concept need to fulfill? So in order to ensure that the campaign that you decide or the push that you decide is actually returning on investment, you have to make sure that concept is sound and solid and does, at the end of the day, achieve the return on investment that you're trying to garner. Oftentimes people get excited about an idea, but it doesn't actually fulfill the goal. And this is where a lot of people pick up and they don't create a plan that's actually effective at the end of the day. They get excited about an idea, they go down that route, and you don't actually garner anything out of it. And so that's why it's really, really important to be very clear about what your main measurements are, what your main objectives are, and who your target is, and your target demographic. So as you're concepting and you brainstorm a ton of ideas, which is what I would suggest doing, you write down all these ideas and you shorten the list, and then you measure it against those questions. Does it resonate with my target demographic? Will it help us garner the most amount of impressions? Does it, achieve our objectives in that year? So you have all of these questions to measure your concept against. What must it accomplish? What outcomes do you want to see? What will your target bullseye be interested in? So once you measure that, you'll become very clear that even though you may love a concept, it might not be the most effective in actually achieving what you want to achieve at the end of the day. So really, really being clear on that will help you ensure that whatever your campaign is will ultimately help you achieve the measurement that you want to achieve, which kind of dives into the next section. Concept and choosing the right tactics. As you know, there are a million options out there now, not only in the social realm, but in the traditional realm. Now there's new mediums coming up called native advertising. There's a million things to choose. When you don't, in order not to get overwhelmed by those, really just look at your target demographic and what they care about, what their behaviors are, what are they reading, what do they care about. And when you do that, it really, really narrows down those mediums. And that's when you can explore. I would go and talk to different media outlets, different media buy options, and go, okay, this is my target demographic. My goal is to get as many impressions as possible. Tell me what you can offer me. Those media outlets then are the responsible parties to come back and tell you exactly which ones help fulfill your end goals. Better yet, if you have more of your marketing plan done, I would send the first situational analysis part with your vision and mission, send it all to them. They will help you create a plan based on that. Then you're really choosing from the variety that's provided to you. With traditional mediums, as you know, they are a little bit more expensive. There's a lot less tracking involved, so it's a lot of more impression-based campaigns that go with traditional. Obviously, there's great ways of tracking nowadays with call tracking metrics. There's a lot of online organizations that generate unique numbers where they can record phone calls with, they can actually track the length of the phone call, they can track where they're calling from, etc. Obviously, with privacy policies in place. There's also unique URLs, so unique URL links that you can link up so that if you want to measure a billboard or you want to measure a print ad or you want to measure, any medium, you just create unique URLs and call trackings, and then that way you can find out which traditional medium is the most effective. With digital mediums, a lot of times they already have those in place. If not, again, you can use those call tracking as well as the unique URLs. But those mediums really, really help you garner the measurements to figure out what it is that you need. Oftentimes, if you have a smaller budget, going digital is a more affordable approach. Going traditional and digital is obviously the most ideal combination that you can have. But if you were to choose one with a limited budget, I would definitely go with digital. So I had talked about rich versus reach, but talking about impressions versus actual lead generation. So with rich, it's really talking about lead generation, engagement, how many people you've educated, the ones where the individual, your target demographic, is actually interacting with your campaign. Reach, on the other hand, is whenever you go out and you see a billboard and that's an impression. So anytime an organization may have seen your campaign or may have seen it and walked by it, that can be a traditional billboard or it can be a digital ad. There are different ways to measure reach as well. So these are two very different kinds of campaigns, and so therefore you would do a very different type of promotional tactic. I would choose one. Well, you have to only really choose one, or you're splitting your efforts in that arena. And then lead versus conversion. Creating leads are people that are actually interested in buying your product, whereas a conversion can be anybody engaging in your campaign. So it's a very different way of actually defining that. So the more specific you can be, the more effective your campaign is going to be in actually achieving those. So many times when we're in brainstorming sessions and then we bring it to the client, they're like, oh, but we really loved this concept. And when we bring it back to, okay, what are the measurements we want to achieve, it becomes very obvious which campaign you should go with at the end of the day. So that is actually very much the key to success in a campaign. So long versus short cycle sales cycles. This also very much affects the way you market. Do you want a long tail, like a long-term, period of slow but easy impressions, or do you want a really short, tight cycle of promotion? So that really depends on the sales cycle that it takes you. Is it 30 days? Is it 10 days? Is it 1 day? What's the decision-making process when they're buying your product? And that will also inform you about the length of the campaign and which mediums that you might want to choose. So traditional obviously has a longer cycle. Digital has a much faster turnaround. So those will help you choose the right tactics to help you achieve your goal at the end of the day. So measuring and tracking success. Really at the heart of everything that we do, we look at the numbers. And a KPI, obviously key performance indicators, are really measurements that tell you whether or not you're achieving what you're trying to achieve. Sometimes people set out goals that they feel are more achievable. What we prefer to do is set out the goal that's accurate. So for example, lead generation is oftentimes a scary goal to create. But instead of saying, trying to garner, 100 leads, say garner 2 leads. That's a better way of ensuring that you're really aligned with your end goal and creating the return on investment that you want, rather than shying away from it and being saying like, okay, we'll just really focus on lead impressions this year. So really committing to that goal and working towards it is going to help you become more successful. I've mentioned this a few times already. SMART goals, accountabilities are really important. This should be secondary to your alignment goal, which is the one main goal you use for every year to define whether or not your campaign was successful. And then finally, revisiting and adjusting. Oftentimes, what people do is they set out the KPI for this year, and they don't really look at it, or they don't have a structured way of actually tracking whether or not that we're hitting the numbers. Whereas if you find out very early on that the campaign you're running isn't really producing the results, you can really begin to adjust and revisit by looking at what exactly isn't working with the campaign and working towards it. Oftentimes when we do campaigns, in the first few months, the numbers come in and you see, okay, we really need to tweak the campaign in this regard because there's more engagement in this area. So we put all our efforts in that arena. So a lot of it is really refining and adjusting and refining and adjusting over the year until you ultimately can hit your goal at the end of the year. It's important to revisit it with your frontline team. often so that they really, really have a good idea and a good pulse on what's working and what isn't working. Whereas if you visit it quarterly or you visit it infrequently, it's really hard, and it's to maximize every dollar that you're putting into the campaign. So proper tracking tools, sometimes people have like a really great KPI, but they're actually not measuring the KPI, they're measuring something around the KPI. So really having the right proper tracking tools and defining exactly what contributes to your end goal is also really important. So call tracking metrics, you know, it's great if they call, but is it actually a lead? So what are dead leads? What are fake leads? What are, you know, junk leads? It's really important to know the difference so that when you're tracking, you're not just tracking what we call vanity metrics, which a lot of organizations do. You're tracking true metrics and really committing to that. Again, unique URLs. It's important to have that, but if you're tracking conversions, you really need a lead generation form so that you know exactly. So you have a unique URL, someone visits it, and then when they fill in a form, then you're actually tracking a lead generation. Whereas tracking just people visiting that link is not actually accurate to what you're trying to measure. So those are little details to make sure of. And then Google Analytics, people love this. A lot of people have it on their website. If you don't, you definitely should. It's completely free. And it shows you the traffic that runs across your website and the behaviors that people have. There's a ton of information there. So it's really easy to get attached to certain wonderful metrics, but if it doesn't align with your goal at the end of the day, it's really not going to be effective. So again, really outlining beforehand what you're going to monitor as contributing to your KPI will be very important. And then tracking forms, which I mentioned earlier, these really do help you look at rich engagement when people are interacting with your promotional campaign. So that kind of wraps up. I know I speak really quickly, and I'm trying to get as much information across as possible, but that does wrap up a lot of the bulk of the key items that help you achieve your ROI when you're writing a marketing plan. Are there any questions? Should I flip it back to Carly?
Hi guys. Okay, so we do have a question from Christopher. He wants to know if you can define concepting.
Sure. Concepting is basically when you have the skeleton of your plan laid out, but you haven't decided how you're going to promote your campaign. So for example, I know that this year I want to generate a lot of impressions, but I don't exactly have a campaign or promotional outlet to achieve that. So for example, you might decide that in my concepting session that we're going to choose these mediums to promote on, or you want to generate a unique key message because maybe your current branding doesn't do that. So it's creating an idea or concept to get your message out there.
Did that answer your question, Christopher? Just let me know. Yes, you answered it. Perfect. Thank you, Tammy.
Great.
So Alora also has a question. What would be an example of a single goal for a marketing plan?
You mean for the KPIs per year? Is that correct?
I'm just going to wait for her response. Yes.
No. Okay, perfect. So the example I gave earlier was impressions. So that's how many times someone is seeing your key message in the public. Another example would be how many leads you've generated. Another one would be how many people have actually been educated by your campaign. So there's different ways you can measure that. We had a client call education whenever they've answered a question correctly. So they actually wanted to create a platform where they've answered the question correctly so that we know that we've educated them. So it can be pretty much anything that really fulfills your end goal for that year. Does that answer the question?
Just wait. Yeah, she said, thanks. She said, do you have any advice for marketing plans for retention / existing customers?
Oh yeah, for sure. A lot of times, you know, with the Pareto law, a lot of your existing customers make up a lot of your sales. And so with goals like that, we even have one where basically we talk about how many individuals are actually repeating their business with us. And so you make that measurement up, so like how many of our clients are repeating business, and then you develop a campaign around that. So, what's a way to encourage businesses to, repeat working with us? What are different ways that incentivize? What do they like about working with us? And then really driving that home. So it might be, before you finish working with them, you do a touch point with them to be like, is there anything else that we can do for you? So really, really identifying what your current customers care about and then driving that home with them will help you retain your customers, but also your measurement will be very clear as to whether or not you're successful in doing that.
Perfect. We also have one from Sherry. Can you give an example or two of where Rich vs. Reach has worked for a client?
Sure. For example, we just did a campaign for Made in Strathcona. About 3 years ago, our first year was that the biggest barrier to success for them was that the public had viewed the area negatively. So that was considered a reach campaign because they wanted perception shifting, which is an audience-wide example. And so that means that in order for us to succeed, we needed to hit a certain amount of impressions. So I think our aim was 5 million and we got 8 million impressions. And so we went out there and we decided that we'd create a hook, which was I think it was like free tours for the businesses in the area. But it actually, the tactic around it was to get as many impressions as possible. So it was a perfect media hook. And so we were covered by CBC, Global Television, Province, Vancouver Sun, Georgia Strait. And it was great because we got all these impressions, and that's a reach campaign. A rich campaign, for example, is Opticians Council of Canada. We wanted to educate the public as much as possible. And they had, great exposure already. They didn't care about that. They wanted to get as many people educated, actually showing that they've learned something about, eye health. And so what we did was we created a campaign that was completely educational. So we generated 30 questions in a month, and every time you answered a question, it would actually enter you in a draw to win a large prize. And so we ended up, doing the measurement by how many answers, how many people answered things correctly, and how many registered. So we set up, I don't know, I think we had over 180,000 people correctly answer questions. And so that was our measurement of rich, because that's actually fully engaging in the campaign, not just hearing about it and changing their mind.
Perfect. So Christopher says, Tammy, we've reached out to your organization and found it helpful. We are currently working on a business and marketing plan to retain a capital loan. To ensure this is successful, does your organization provide a very brief review of this to help us obtain that loan? Would you like to use your services? We would like to use your services, sorry.
Yeah, feel free to reach out. Obviously, I'd like a little bit more information to make sure that I'm not just saying that we can help, but I'd like to see if we can.
And he says this is why we are applying for the loan. So
sorry, I missed that.
He said, which is why we're applying for the loan.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have any other questions from anyone? I'll give just a few seconds here to see if anybody can think of anything else. Sherry says thank you. Christopher says thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I think it was a really great presentation. I think everybody learned a lot about today's presentation. So thank you so much, Tammy. Really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who took their time out today to join the webinar. Like I said, I'm going to be sending a follow-up email to all the attendees and those who missed the webinar as well. And it's going to have Tammy's contact information in there. So, I mean, feel free to contact her directly and, get that meeting with her that she was talking about earlier. So Sherry says, hope to talk to you soon, Tammy. She's going to need to connect with you. So, Yeah, thanks again, Tammy, and thanks
Great.
for everybody for joining. You will get an email with the recording of the presentation too, just in case you want to follow up with anything. All right. So have a great
Great. Thank you so much
one.
for having me.
All right. Bye.
Bye.